That day, December 7th, 1941, the morning silence was shattered by the roar of engines. Japanese planes, a dark cloud in the sky, descended upon Pearl Harbor. This surprise attack, a black day in American history, was unexpected. The harbor, known as the Pearl of the Pacific, turned into hell. The first wave, 183 Japanese planes, led by Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, took off from the north of Oahu, heading towards their targets. Behind them came the second wave of 171 planes, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Shigekazu Shimazaki. The Japanese attacked mercilessly, destroying everything in their path. Ships in the harbor burned, soldiers fought for their lives. Amidst this chaos, a group of brave American soldiers would stage a historic resistance. This resistance, a symbol of hope and courage amidst the flames of Pearl Harbor, would change the course of the war. Storm clouds gather in the Far East. In the late 1930s, as Japan's aggression towards China escalated, the United States decided to support China. The invasion of Manchuria and the clash at Marco Polo Bridge signaled that war was inevitable. America took a clear stand against Japanese expansionism by providing loans to China and cutting off trade with Japan. The militarist government in Tokyo reacted with anger. Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union was an opportunity for Japan. With the Soviet threat gone, it was time to realize their ambitions in the Far East. In the fall of 1941, negotiations between the two countries failed and war clouds darkened. Japanese Prime Minister Tojo, abandoning hopes for peace, decided to attack. The target was the American Pacific Fleet. If successful, nothing would stand in the way of Japan's dominance in Southeast Asia. On November 5, 1941, the attack order was given, and the Japanese fleet silently gathered in the Coral Islands. On November 26th, the massive fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Nagumo, set sail for Hawaii. The moment of destiny was approaching. The calm before the storm. Since the spring of 1940, Pearl Harbor, home to the U.S. Pacific Fleet, was filled with warships and planes. But the shadow of the approaching war darkened this peaceful scene. The commanders at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Kimmel and General Short, received a series of warnings. The message on November 27th was clear. This is a war warning. Despite these warnings, the precautions taken were insufficient. Short, fearing sabotage, gathered the planes at the base and operated the radars on a limited schedule. Kimmel failed to locate the Japanese fleet and did not expand reconnaissance activities. Pearl Harbor was vulnerable and unprepared for the approaching storm. The countdown towards Pearl Harbor. On the morning of December 7th, tension was high in Washington. The Japanese ambassadors were summoned to an urgent meeting indicating that war was imminent. But this critical information was delayed due to bureaucracy and reached General Marshall, the Chief of Staff, hours later. Marshall, sensing the danger, decided to send a new warning, but it was too late when the telegram reached Hawaii. The Japanese planes had already begun their attack. In Pearl Harbor, small but important signs were ignored. A Japanese submarine was detected and a destroyer fired on it. But Admiral Kimmel waited for confirmation of the reports, and the Japanese attack began. That morning, a soldier undergoing radar training saw a large group of planes on the screen, but his lieutenant told him they were American planes and to ignore them. Once again, a vital opportunity was missed. Attack and destruction. On the morning of December 7th, at 7:55, Japanese dive bombers appeared in the skies over Pearl Harbor. The first wave, consisting of over 200 planes, mercilessly attacked warships and air bases. General Short's decision to gather the planes together due to fear of sabotage created a golden opportunity for the Japanese. Hundreds of planes were destroyed before they could even take off. The ships in the harbor were easy targets for Japanese bombers. The USS Arizona exploded, the USS West Virginia sank, the USS Oklahoma capsized. Almost every ship in the harbor was damaged. The attack was a great success for the Japanese. American forces were caught unprepared, ammunition locked, planes grounded, weapons unattended. But many soldiers bravely resisted, even in the chaos. Doris Miller manned anti-aircraft guns on the USS Nevada. Lieutenant Commander Thomas grounded the USS Nevada to save it from sinking. The second wave began at 8:50 a.m. Though not as successful as the first, it still caused heavy damage. Shortly after 9 a.m., the Japanese planes withdrew, leaving behind a scene of terrible destruction. 2,403 Americans were killed, 1,178 wounded. The greatest loss was on the USS Arizona. A Japanese bomb caused a massive explosion in the ship's forward magazine, killing hundreds of young sailors. A story of hope from Pearl Harbor. Amidst the chaos and destruction, the USS St. Louis became the first large American ship to escape the burning harbor. This cruiser, where Lieutenant Charles E. Chip Larkin also served, was docked at the time of the attack and was unprepared to set sail. But with Captain George A. Rood's courageous decision, the St. Louis not only responded with anti-aircraft fire, but also started to move out of the harbor. The crew frantically cut their connections with Honolulu and severed the gangplank. The St. Louis backed out of the dock, navigating through obstacles and enemy fire with Lieutenant Larkin's skillful maneuvers. It passed between two minesweepers and reached the open sea. But the danger wasn't over. 2 torpedoes fired from a Japanese submarine luckily hit a coral reef and exploded, saving the St. Louis. This daring escape earned the St. Louis the nickname Lucky Lou. Lucky Lou wasn't the only ship to survive the attack. Thanks to Admiral Kimmel's decisions, 2 important aircraft carriers, the USS Enterprise and the USS Lexington, were not in the harbor that day. These ships and their accompanying cruisers continued their duties away from the destruction. A 3rd aircraft carrier, the USS Saratoga, was safe in San Diego. The Pearl Harbor attack dealt a heavy blow to the American Navy, but the escape of Lucky Lou and the absence of other ships in the harbor offered a glimmer of hope for the future fight. The Third Wave Controversy. As the smoke cleared over Pearl Harbor, a heated debate erupted among Japanese commanders. Some young officers tried to convince Vice Admiral Nagumo to launch a 3rd attack. They wanted to sink the remaining warships and destroy vital shore installations. But Nagumo hesitated. American anti-aircraft fire had intensified during the 2nd wave, and the Japanese had suffered losses. Nagumo was worried that a 3rd attack would cost more planes. Moreover, the location of the American aircraft carriers was still unknown. The possibility of a counterattack made Nagumo even more uneasy. There were also logistical challenges. Fuel reserves were dwindling, and planes would have to land at night. Considering all these risks, Nagumo decided to withdraw. The main objective of the mission had been achieved, and according to Japanese naval doctrine, preserving strength was more important. However, historians believe this decision was a grave mistake. If the Japanese had launched a 3rd attack and targeted the shore installations, they could have severely hampered American war efforts. According to Admiral Nimitz, the destruction of these facilities could have delayed America's operations in the Pacific by more than a year and prolonged the war by 2 more years. The next day, Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, supported Nagumo's decision. But looking back, he would remember this decision with great regret. Not ordering a 3rd attack would go down in history as one of the biggest mistakes of the war. This missed opportunity might have changed the course of the war. On December 8th, in an atmosphere charged with emotion, Congress declared war on Japan. The Pearl Harbor attack had awakened a sleeping giant. The daring raid on Tokyo. After the Pearl Harbor attack, America was burning with a desire for revenge. President Roosevelt knew that a swift retaliation against Japan was necessary. The man to undertake this mission would be the daring aviator, Jimmy Doolittle. Doolittle believed that an attack on the Japanese mainland would both give hope to the American people and shake the Japanese leadership. The plan was based on Navy Captain Francis S. Lowe's idea that bombers could be launched from an aircraft carrier. The B-25B Mitchell bomber was chosen for the mission, but its range was insufficient. Doolittle and his team modified the planes to carry twice the normal amount of fuel. Other aircraft were also considered, but the B-25 was the most suitable option for this daring operation. Thus began the preparations for one of the most courageous attacks in the history of warfare. The Doolittle raid would boost American morale and shatter the Japanese perception of invincibility. But many challenges awaited Doolittle and his team in this dangerous mission. The Soviet option disappears. Doolittle's initial plan involved the bombers landing in Vladivostok after the attack. This would shorten the flight distance and allow the planes to be handed over to the Soviets. However, the Soviets rejected this offer due to their neutrality pact with Japan. Doolittle found a solution in China. Chiang Kai-shek agreed to provide landing fields despite the risk of Japanese retaliation. This was a risky decision, but it was vital for the mission. 5 potential airfields were identified in China. These fields would be critical refueling points for the bombers to reach Chongqing after striking Japan. But there was another major challenge. There would be no fighter escort for the bombers. Normally, bombers rely on fighter planes for protection from enemy aircraft. In this mission, the crews would have to face the enemy alone, relying only on their skills and the element of surprise. The Doolittle raid carried great risks at every step. But to uplift the American people and shake the Japanese confidence, these risks had to be taken. This mission, filled with courage and determination, would be a turning point in the course of history. The day of the attack. April 1st, 1942, Alameda Naval Air Station. 16 modified B-25 bombers were carefully loaded onto the Hornet aircraft carrier. On each plane, a 5-man crew and maintenance personnel, a total of 130 soldiers, were preparing for a historic mission. Japanese friendship medals were tied to the bombs as a symbol of retaliation. The bombers, with reduced weaponry to increase their range, were crammed onto the Hornet's deck. On April 2nd, the Hornet and Task Force 18 left San Francisco Bay. The next day, the final modifications were completed. A few days later, the Hornet rendezvoused with Task Force 16, commanded by Vice Admiral William Halsey, Jr. The Enterprise's fighters would protect the entire task force from potential Japanese attacks. The combined force consisted of 2 aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and tankers. Radio silence was maintained to avoid detection. On the afternoon of April 17th, the tankers completed refueling the task force and withdrew. The aircraft carriers and cruisers continued their rapid advance towards enemy waters east of Japan. The historic mission had now reached a point of no return. The attack begins. Tension mounted as the task force approached the Japanese coast. On the morning of April 18th, a Japanese patrol boat spotted them and raised the alarm. The element of surprise was lost. Doolittle and the Hornet's captain made a quick decision to launch the B-25S immediately. Despite being farther away and earlier than planned, they had no other choice. None of the pilots had ever taken off from an aircraft carrier before. Even Doolittle's plane nearly crashed into the sea, but all 16 planes successfully took off and headed towards Japan. At noon Tokyo time, the bombers reached their targets. They dropped their bombs on military and industrial targets in Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, and other cities. Although they encountered light anti-aircraft fire and a few enemy planes, none of the bombers were shot down. The bombers, strafing their targets with machine gun fire, successfully completed their mission. But the journey wasn't over yet. They had to reach the landing fields in China and return safely. The Doolittle raid dealt an unexpected blow to Japan. This daring attack, which gave hope to the American people, also cast doubt on the Japanese leadership. But the danger wasn't over for the crews. The journey home was fraught with new challenges. The end of the war. The Doolittle raid was a significant turning point in American history. This daring attack, which shattered the Japanese perception of invincibility, gave hope to the American people and changed the course of the war. The raid also caused the Japanese to reevaluate their defense strategies and shift resources to the islands in the Pacific. This was a crucial factor that contributed to the American victory at the Battle of Midway. The Doolittle raid went down in history as an event symbolizing the triumph of courage and determination.